The blood on the hay was still fresh when Nora Mercer pushed open the barn door that November morning. She froze, one hand on the latch, her breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. A man lay crumpled against the far wall, his dark coat torn, his face turned away. For one terrible moment, she thought he was dead. Then his chest moved. Shallow. Pained. Nora's first instinct was to run back to the schoolhouse and bolt the door. Her second was to check if he was armed. Her third, the one that won, was to cross the barn floor and kneel in the straw beside him. He jerked awake the moment her shadow fell across him. His hand went to his belt, found nothing, and his eyes, hazel and sharp despite the pain, locked on her face with the alertness of a man who expected a bullet. "I am not going to hurt you," Nora said quietly. She kept her hands visible. "You are bleeding." The man's jaw tightened. He was maybe 30, with a short beard and wind-blown dark hair that stuck to his forehead with sweat, despite the cold. His work shirt was torn at the shoulder, dark with blood. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her plain burgundy dress to the locket at her throat to the practical way she knelt in the dirty straw. Without flinching. "You should leave," he said. His voice was rough, Western, but educated underneath. "If they find you here with me, it will not go well for you." "Who is they?" Nora asked. "The railroad. The sheriff. Take your pick." Nora's pulse kicked up. She had heard rumors in town, whispers about land deeds and hired guns, about ranchers being driven off their property by men who wore badges but answered to the Union Pacific. She had kept her head down, the way a woman alone learned to do. But this man in her barn was not a rumor. He was bleeding and real, and looking at her like she was the last honest face he expected to see. "What did you do?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. Then, with a bitter edge, I tried to keep my ranch. Nora had been teaching school in Eagle Gulch for 3 years. She had come west after her father, a Boston reverend, had told her she was too willful for a proper marriage and too educated for her own good. She had built a small life here. A rented room. A classroom full of children. A reputation for being respectable, if a bit remote. She did not make trouble. She did not take risks. But she also knew what it looked like when a man was telling the truth. "What is your name?" she asked. "Hollis Granger." He shifted, wincing. "Moonstone Ranch, 5 miles north." Or it was, until the railroad decided they wanted the water rights. Nora had heard of Moonstone Ranch. It was one of the old Spanish land grants. Good water, decent grazing. The kind of property men killed for. "They are saying you stole something," she said carefully. Hollis's expression darkened. "I took back papers that belonged to my family. The railroad hired a lawyer to forge a new deed. I found the original in his office, and I took it. That makes me a thief in the eyes of the law." "Do you still have the papers?" Nora asked. Hollis hesitated. Then he reached inside his coat, slow and careful, and pulled out a folded sheaf of documents. Blood-stained, wrinkled, but intact. Nora took them, her hands steady, even though her heart was hammering. She unfolded the top page and read the careful script. A Spanish land grant, dated 1824, deeding 3,000 acres to the Granger family. Below it, a newer document, unsigned, with different handwriting, and a suspiciously convenient clause transferring water rights to the Union Pacific Railroad. You took these from the railroad lawyer, Nora said. From his safe. 2 nights ago. And now they have a warrant for your arrest. They have a rope, Hollis said flatly. The warrant is just for show. Nora folded the papers and looked at him. He was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not threatening, just focused. Like she was a problem he was trying to solve, and he did not have much time. Why did you come here? She asked. I did not mean to. I was trying to reach the rail station in Blackwater, but they caught up with me on the ridge. I took a bullet, and my horse threw me. I crawled into the first shelter I found. He paused. I did not know it was yours. Nora stood, brushing hay from her skirt. The smart thing would be to walk away. The safe thing would be to send word to the sheriff and let the law sort it out. But she had been in Eagle Gulch long enough to know that the law and justice were not always the same thing, especially when the railroad was involved. Can you ride? She asked. If I have to, then you need to leave before full light. The school day starts in 2 hours, and the children will be coming past here. Hollis pushed himself up, his face going white with the effort. Where is your horse? In the paddock. But you are not taking her. Nora crossed to the corner of the barn and pulled a saddle blanket off a peg. You are going to wait here until tonight. I will bring you food and bandages. After dark, I will help you get to Blackwater. Why would you do that? Hollis asked. You do not know me. Nora met his eyes. No. But I know what it looks like when someone is telling the truth. And I know what the railroad does to people who get in their way. Nora left him with a canteen of water and a promise to return at midday. She walked back to the schoolhouse, her mind racing. She had just committed herself to helping a wanted man. If the sheriff found out, she could lose her position. Worse, she could be arrested as an accomplice. But the papers were real. She knew forgery when she saw it. Her father had been a reverend, but he had also been a man who bent the truth when it suited him. And Nora had learned young to recognize the difference between a lie and a fact. The school day passed in a blur. She taught arithmetic and spelling, heard recitations, and handed out assignments, all while her thoughts circled back to the man in her barn. At noon, she dismissed the children early, claiming a headache, and walked back across the snowy yard with a basket of bread, cheese, and dried apples hidden under a cloth. Hollis was awake, sitting with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. He relaxed a fraction when he saw her. No sign of trouble, Nora said, setting the basket down. But the sheriff came by the school this morning, asking if anyone had seen a stranger. What did you tell him? Hollis asked. That I had not seen anyone, which was true at the time. Hollis almost smiled. You are a careful woman, Miss Mercer. Nora raised an eyebrow. How do you know my name? Your students were shouting it across the yard this morning. She knelt and unwrapped the basket. Eat. Then, I am going to clean that wound before it festers. Hollis took the bread and ate in silence. Nora watched him, noting the way he moved, economical and controlled despite the pain. He was not a man used to asking for help. That much was clear. But he also was not foolish enough to refuse it. When he finished, she rolled up his sleeve and examined the bullet wound. It was a clean graze, painful but not deep. She cleaned it with whiskey from a flask she kept for medicinal purposes, and he did not make a sound, though his jaw went tight. You are lucky, she said, wrapping the wound with a strip of clean linen. Another inch, and it would have shattered your shoulder. I do not feel lucky, Hollis said. You are alive. That is lucky enough. He looked at her then. Really looked. And Nora felt the weight of it. He had a face that had seen hard things, but his eyes were direct, unshadowed by cruelty. She had known cruel men. Her father had been one. Hollis Granger was not. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. Nora tied off the bandage. Because someone has to. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. Hollis was silent for a moment. Then he said, You are running from something too. Nora's hands stilled. She did not look at him. That is none of your business. No, he agreed. But I recognize it. You have the look of someone who remade herself somewhere new. Nora stood, brushing off her skirt. We all have pasts, Mr. Granger. The question is what we do with the present. That night, after the last light faded from the schoolhouse windows, Nora returned to the barn with a saddled horse and a plan. Hollis was on his feet, moving stiffly but upright. He had washed his face and combed his hair back with his fingers, and in the lantern light he looked less like a fugitive, and more like what he had been before the railroad came. A rancher trying to hold his ground. The train to Blackwater leaves at dawn, Nora said. If you ride through the night, you can catch it. From there you can get to Denver and find a real lawyer. Hollis took the reins. And the papers? Nora pulled them from inside her coat and handed them over. He folded them carefully and tucked them into his shirt. Thank you, he said. I will not forget this. Just go, Nora said. And do not get caught. Hollis swung into the saddle, his face tight with pain, but his seat steady. He looked down at her, and for a moment, neither of them moved. If I make it out of this, he said, I am coming back. You do not owe me anything, Nora said. That is not why I would come back. Then he turned the horse and rode into the darkness, and Nora stood in the barn doorway watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the wind. She thought that would be the end of it. She thought she had done her part, and the rest was up to him. But 2 days later, the sheriff came to the school with a warrant and a question. Miss Mercer, Sheriff Taggart said, his voice polite, but his eyes hard. We have reason to believe you gave aid to a wanted man. I am going to need you to come with me. Nora kept her expression calm. I do not know what you are talking about. Taggart stepped closer. A witness saw a man matching Hollis Granger's description near your property 3 nights ago, and your horse was seen on the Ridge Road the next morning. My horse was in the paddock, Nora said evenly. Then you will not mind if we search your barn. Nora's pulse kicked, but she did not let it show. Search if you like. You will not find anything. Taggart studied her for a long moment. Then, he tipped his hat. We will be watching you, Miss Mercer. If Granger contacts you again, you will tell us. Understood. Understood, Nora said. But she knew it was not over. The railroad did not give up. And neither did she. 3 weeks passed. Nora heard nothing from Hollis. The railroad lawyer, a man named Cutler, began making inquiries around town. He was smooth, well-dressed, the kind of man who smiled while he threatened you. He stopped by the school one afternoon and asked if she knew anything about missing documents. Nora told him she did not. Cutler smiled. That is good, Miss Mercer, because theft is a serious crime, and anyone who aids a thief is just as guilty. I teach children to read, Nora said coolly. I do not involve myself in legal matters. Of course, Cutler said. But if you do happen to remember anything, I hope you will come to me first. The railroad is very generous to those who cooperate. After he left, Nora locked the schoolhouse door and sat at her desk, her hands shaking. She had been careful. She had covered her tracks. But Cutler was not a fool, and neither was Taggart. If Hollis did not surface soon with proof, the railroad would find a way to bury the truth, and everyone connected to it. That night, as she walked home through the snow, a figure stepped out of the shadows near the livery stable. Nora's hand went to the small knife she kept in her coat pocket. Then the figure moved into the lamplight, and she saw his face. Hollis. He looked thinner, harder, but his eyes were the same. Steady. Focused. Alive. You should not be here, Nora said, her voice low and urgent. I know, Hollis said. But I needed to see you. And I need your help. One more time. Nora glanced around. The street was empty, but that could change in a heartbeat. Not here. Follow me. She led him to the small house she rented on the edge of town. A 2-room cabin with a fireplace and a view of the hills. She bolted the door behind them and turned to face him. What happened? She asked. Hollis pulled off his coat and hat. I made it to Denver. I found a lawyer, a good one, who agreed to take the case. But when we went to file the original deed with the territorial court, we found out Cutler had already registered a duplicate. A forgery. And the judge is in the railroad's pocket. So the papers are useless, Nora said. Not useless. But not enough on their own. Hollis ran a hand through his hair. I need the other half. Nora frowned. What other half? There were 2 deeds. One for the land, one for the water rights. I only found the land deed in Cutler's safe. The water rights deed is still missing. And without it, the railroad can claim they bought the water legally, even if they do not own the land. Where is the second deed? Nora asked. I think it is still at the ranch. Hidden. My father used to keep important papers in a lockbox under the floorboards in the barn. If it is still there, we can prove the railroad has no legal claim. We, Nora said. Hollis met her eyes. I cannot do this alone. The ranch is being watched. If I go back, they will arrest me. But if you go, you are just a school teacher visiting an old property. No one will question it. You want me to break into your ranch and steal a deed from under the floorboards? Nora said slowly. I want you to retrieve a deed that belongs to my family, Hollis corrected. There is a difference. Nora crossed her arms. And if I get caught, then you tell them you were looking for me, and you found the lockbox by accident. You were going to turn it over to the sheriff. Hollis stepped closer. I would not ask if I had any other choice. But you are the only person I trust. Nora looked at him, this man she barely knew, who had crashed into her life and turned it upside down. She should say no. She should tell him to leave and never come back. But the truth was, she had stopped being safe the moment she knelt in the hay beside him. And if she was going to be in danger anyway, she might as well be in it for a reason. All right, she said. I will go. But you are going to tell me everything. No more secrets. Hollis told her everything. About the ranch his grandfather had built. About his father, who had died 2 years ago and left Hollis with debts and a crumbling house and 3,000 acres of land that should have been enough to start over. About the railroad surveyors who came through last spring, charming and polite, and then returned in the fall with lawyers and guns. About the night he broke into Cutler's office, found the forged deed, and realized he was the only thing standing between his family's legacy and the railroad's greed. And about the one thing he had never told anyone, that his father had not died of a fever, the way everyone thought. He had killed himself after the railroad threatened to foreclose. And Hollis had found him, too late to save him, and had spent every day since trying not to blame himself. "I should have fought harder," Hollis said quietly. "I should have seen it coming." Nora sat across from him, the firelight casting shadows on her face. "You were one man against a corporation. You did what you could. It was not enough." Nora leaned forward. "Then make it enough now." Hollis looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, respect, and something warmer, something that made Nora's breath catch. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked. Nora was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Because I know what it is like to be told you are not good enough, to have someone take everything from you and call it justice. My father was a reverend. He preached forgiveness and grace, and then he threw me out because I questioned him in front of the congregation. I rebuilt my life here, but I never forgave him. And I never forgave myself for not fighting back." Hollis's gaze was steady. "So this is you fighting back. This is me choosing a side," Nora said. The next morning, Nora borrowed a wagon from the livery and drove north toward Moonstone Ranch. Hollis stayed hidden in her cabin, watching the street from behind the curtain. If anyone asked, she was visiting a sick friend in the hills. The ranch appeared after an hour's ride, a low house with a sagging porch and a barn that had seen better days. The fence was down in places, and the corral was empty. It looked abandoned. But as Nora climbed down from the wagon, she saw fresh boot prints in the snow near the barn door. Someone had been here recently. Nora approached the barn slowly, her hand on the knife in her pocket. The door was ajar. Inside, the air smelled of hay and old leather. She scanned the floor, looking for anything that might mark the hiding place Hollis had described. There, in the corner, near the back wall, a section of floorboards that did not quite match the others. Nora knelt and pried up the boards with her fingers. Underneath, a small iron lockbox, rusted but intact. She pulled it out, her heart pounding. The lock was old, but still functional. She did not have a key. She would have to take it back to town and figure out how to open it. She was halfway to the door when she heard voices outside. Nora froze. Two men, maybe three, talking in low tones. Then footsteps, coming closer. Nora shoved the lockbox inside her coat and moved toward the side door, the one that led to the paddock. But before she could reach it, the front door swung open, and a man stepped inside. Railroad deputy. Tall, armed, and looking right at her. "What are you doing here?" he said. Nora forced herself to stay calm. "I am looking for someone. A friend said she might be staying out here." The deputy did not move. "This property is under railroad supervision. You are trespassing." "I did not see any signs," Nora said. "That does not matter." The deputy stepped closer. "What is in your coat?" Nora's pulse hammered. "Nothing." "Show me." Nora's hand tightened on the lockbox. If she ran, he would shoot. If she fought, she would lose. So she did the only thing she could think of. She pulled out the lockbox and held it up. I found this in the barn, she said. I was going to take it to the sheriff. The deputy reached for it. Give it here. Nora stepped back. I said I was going to take it to the sheriff. Not to you. The deputy's hand went to his gun. Lady, you do not want to make this difficult. And that was when the second man stepped into the barn behind the deputy, and Nora's heart stopped. It was Cutler, the railroad lawyer. Smiling. Miss Mercer, Cutler said pleasantly. What a surprise. Nora kept her expression neutral. Mr. Cutler, I have to say, I did not expect to find you here. Cutler stepped around the deputy, his hands in his pockets. But now that you are, perhaps we can have a conversation about that lockbox you are holding. This belongs to the Granger family, Nora said. Does it? Cutler said. Because as I understand it, the Granger family no longer owns this property, which makes anything found on these premises the property of the Union Pacific Railroad. That is not true, Nora said. The deed was forged. Cutler's smile widened. Do you have proof of that? Nora said nothing. I thought not, Cutler said. Now, I am going to make this very simple. You are going to give me that lockbox, and in exchange, I am going to forget I ever saw you here. You can go back to your little schoolhouse and your little life, and no one has to know you were involved in any of this. And if I refuse, Nora said, then I will have you arrested for trespassing and theft, and I will make sure the sheriff knows you have been harboring a fugitive. Cutler tilted his head. How do you think that will go for you, Miss Mercer? Nora's mind raced. If she gave him the lockbox, Hollis lost everything. If she refused, she would be arrested, and Hollis would still lose everything. There was no good choice. But there was a third option. She threw the lockbox, not at Cutler, at the deputy. Hard, straight at his face. He stumbled back, cursing, and Nora ran. She bolted through the side door and into the paddock, her boots slipping in the snow. Behind her, shouts, the crack of a gunshot. She did not look back. She reached the wagon, grabbed the reins, and whipped the horse into motion. The wagon lurched forward, and Nora crouched low, praying the deputy was a bad shot. Another gunshot. The bullet pinged off the wagon bed. Then, she was around the bend and out of sight, and the ranch disappeared behind her. She did not stop until she reached the edge of town. Then she pulled the wagon into the trees and sat, shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The lockbox was gone. She had lost it, but she had gotten away. And that, for now, would have to be enough. When Nora returned to her cabin, Hollis was pacing. He turned the moment she walked in, his face tight with worry. What happened? He said. I found the lockbox, Nora said. But Cutler was there. I had to run. I did not get it open. Hollis exhaled, his shoulders sagging. So, it is over. No, Nora said. I saw what was inside before I threw it. Hollis's head snapped up. What? The box was old. The lock was rusted. When the deputy grabbed for it, I saw through the gap in the lid. There were papers inside, folded, with a wax seal. Hollis stared at her. You saw the deed. I saw something, Nora said. I do not know if it was the water rights deed or something else. But there was definitely a document in there. Which means Cutler knows it exists now too. Then he will destroy it, Hollis said. Not if we get to it first, Hollis shook his head. Nora, they almost killed you. I am not asking you to go back. You are not asking, Nora said. I am choosing. If we do not stop them now, they will take your ranch, and they will come after me anyway for helping you. So we might as well finish this. Hollis looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and took her hands. His grip was warm, steady, and Nora felt the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. You are the bravest person I have ever met, he said quietly. I am terrified, Nora said. That is what makes you brave. They spent the rest of the day planning. Cutler would take the lockbox back to his office in town. He would want to open it carefully, in private, to see what was inside. That gave them a narrow window. One night, maybe less. Hollis knew the layout of Cutler's office. Second floor, above the land registry. 2 entrances. One through the front, one through the back stairwell. A safe in the corner, where Cutler kept all his important documents, including, now, the lockbox. We go in after midnight, Hollis said. You keep watch. I open the safe. Nora frowned. How are you going to open a safe? Hollis gave her a dry look. I grew up on a ranch. I know my way around a lock. That night, they waited until the town was dark and silent. Then, they slipped through the alleys, keeping to the shadows, and reached the back stairwell of the land registry building. The door was locked. Hollis jimmied it open with a piece of wire in under a minute. Inside, the air was cold and stale. They climbed the stairs in silence, their boots muffled on the worn wood. At the top, Hollis paused, listening. Then he pushed open the door to Cutler's office. The room was dark, except for the moonlight slanting through the window. In the corner, a heavy iron safe. Hollis crossed to it and knelt, his ear pressed to the door. Nora stayed by the window, watching the street. Her pulse was so loud she was sure someone would hear it. Minutes passed. Hollis worked in silence, his fingers moving over the dial with practiced precision. Nora glanced back once and saw the concentration on his face, the steady patience of a man who did not panic under pressure. Then, a soft click. Hollis pulled the safe door open. Inside, stacks of documents, ledgers, cash. And there, on top, the lockbox. Hollis pulled it out and forced the lock with a small pry bar. The lid popped open. Inside, a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, with a wax seal at the bottom. Hollis unfolded it carefully. His hands were shaking. It is the water rights deed, he said, his voice rough. Signed by my grandfather. Dated 1824. Legal and binding. Nora let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Then let us go. But before Hollis could move, the door behind them opened. Cutler stepped into the room, holding a lantern. Behind him, Sheriff Taggart, and 2 deputies with rifles. Well, Cutler said, this is unfortunate. Hollis stood slowly, the deed still in his hand. He did not reach for a weapon. He just looked at Cutler with the cold, steady gaze of a man who had nothing left to lose. That deed is legal, Hollis said. You know it. The railroad has no claim to Moonstone Ranch. Cutler set the lantern on the desk. Legal is a matter of perspective, Mr. Granger. And right now, My perspective is the only one that matters. He nodded to Taggart. Arrest them both. Taggart stepped forward. Hollis Granger, you are under arrest for theft and breaking and entering. Miss Mercer, you are under arrest as an accomplice. Nora's pulse hammered. We have proof. The original deed. You cannot ignore it. Watch me, Cutler said. Hollis moved. Not toward Cutler. Toward the window. He shoved it open, grabbed Nora's hand, and pulled her through. They dropped onto the roof of the porch below, rolled, and hit the ground running. Behind them, shouts. The crack of a rifle. Nora stumbled, and Hollis caught her, his arm around her waist, pulling her forward. They ran through the Allies, the darkness their only cover. Behind them, the sound of boots, voices, the jangle of spurs. Hollis pulled her into a narrow gap between two buildings and pressed her against the wall, his body shielding hers. They stood there, breathing hard, listening. The footsteps passed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Hollis was so close Nora could feel the heat of him, the tension in his frame. His hand was still on her waist. His eyes were on hers. We have to go, he said quietly. Nora nodded, but neither of them moved. Then Hollis leaned down and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was desperate, fierce. A man who had been holding back and finally let go. Nora kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for one perfect moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. The taste of him, the feel of his hands on her, the wild certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. Then a shout echoed from the next street over, and they broke apart. Hollis rested his forehead against hers. We have to finish this. I know, Nora said. They ran. They reached Nora's cabin, grabbed what they could carry, and headed for the livery. Hollis saddled 2 horses while Nora kept watch. The deed was folded inside Hollis's shirt, pressed against his heart. Where are we going? Nora asked. Blackwater, Hollis said. We catch the morning train to Denver. We file the deed with the territorial court. We finish this. They will be watching the station, Nora said. I know, Hollis said. But it is the only way. They rode through the night, hard and fast, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. By dawn they reached Blackwater, a rough rail town at the edge of the territory. The train was already at the platform, steam rising from the engine. Hollis and Nora dismounted and left the horses at the livery. Then they walked toward the station, side by side, their hands almost touching. The platform was crowded. Miners, merchants, families. And there, near the ticket booth, 2 men in dark coats. Railroad deputies. They are here, Nora said quietly. I see them, Hollis said. They bought tickets and boarded the train, keeping their heads down. The deputies did not move. But Nora could feel their eyes on her back. The train lurched into motion. Nora and Hollis found seats in the rear car, away from the windows. Hollis kept his hand on the deed. Nora kept her hand on the knife in her pocket. For an hour, nothing happened. The train rolled through the hills, the landscape blurring past. Then the door at the end of the car opened, and Cutler walked in. He was alone, unarmed, as far as Nora could see, but his smile was sharp as a blade. He walked down the aisle and stopped in front of their seats. Mr. Granger, he said pleasantly. Miss Mercer. Going somewhere. Denver, Hollis said. Ah, Cutler said. The territorial court. A bold move. He sat down across from them. May I? Nora said nothing. Hollis's hand tightened on the deed. Here is the thing, Cutler said, his voice conversational. You can take that deed to Denver. You can file it. You can even win your case. But by the time you do, the ranch will be gone. The railroad has a crew tearing down your barn as we speak. By tomorrow, there will not be a Moonstone Ranch to fight for. Hollis's jaw tightened. You cannot do that. I already have, Cutler said. Unless, of course, you want to make a deal. What kind of deal? Hollis said. You give me the deed. I give you $10,000. Enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere the railroad does not care about. Hollis stared at him. You want me to sell my family's legacy for cash. I want you to be smart, Cutler said. You have already lost. This is just me giving you a way to walk away with something. Hollis stood. His voice was cold. Get out. Cutler sighed. I tried. He stood, adjusting his coat. When you change your mind, you know where to find me. He walked back down the aisle and disappeared through the door. Nora looked at Hollis. Are you all right? No, Hollis said. But we are not stopping. The train rolled on. As they neared Denver, Nora saw the city rising in the distance, a sprawl of buildings and smoke. It was bigger than she had imagined, busier, louder. Hollis took her hand. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I want you to know something. Nora looked at him. I was drowning before I met you, Hollis said. I thought the ranch was all I had left. But it is not. You gave me something to fight for that is bigger than land or legacy. You gave me hope. Nora's throat tightened. I did not do anything you would not have done for me. That is not true, Hollis said. You saved my life. You risked everything. And I do not know how to repay that. You do not have to, Nora said. Just do not let them win. Hollis nodded. Then he leaned down and kissed her again, slow and deliberate, and Nora felt the promise in it. Not just for today, for whatever came after. In Denver, they found the lawyer Hollis had hired before, a sharp-eyed man named Brennan, who listened to their story and examined the deed with a jeweler's loupe. This is legitimate, Brennan said. Pre-territorial. Spanish land grant. Water rights included. The railroad has no legal standing. Can we file it today? Hollis asked. We can file it in an hour, Brennan said. But I have to warn you, the railroad will fight this. They will drag it through the courts for years if they have to. Let them, Hollis said. As long as the deed is on record, they cannot tear down the ranch. Actually, Brennan said slowly, they can. Possession is 9/10 of the law. If they occupy the property before the case is settled, they can claim adverse possession. Even with the deed, you might lose. Hollis's face went pale. So what do we do? You go back, Brennan said. You occupy the property. You defend it. And you do not let them take it. Nora looked at Hollis. He looked at her. We go back, Hollis said. They caught the next train west. By the time they reached Eagle Gulch, it was late afternoon. The sky was heavy with snow, and the wind cut like a knife. Hollis rented a wagon, and they drove north, toward Moonstone Ranch. When they arrived, Nora's heart sank. The barn was half demolished. The fences were torn down. A crew of railroad workers was loading timber onto a flatbed wagon, and a foreman stood nearby, shouting orders. Hollis climbed down from the wagon. His face was blank, but Nora could see the fury in his eyes. He walked toward the foreman. "Get off my land," Hollis said. The foreman turned. "This land belongs to the Union Pacific Railroad. You are trespassing." Hollis pulled the deed from his coat and held it up. "This is the original Spanish land grant, signed and sealed, legal and binding. You are the one trespassing." The foreman glanced at the paper, unimpressed. "I do not care what you have. I have orders from Mr. Cutler. This property is being cleared for railroad use." "Then Mr. Cutler is breaking the law," Hollis said. The foreman smiled. "Take it up with the sheriff." Hollis stepped closer. "I am giving you one chance to leave. Peacefully." The foreman's smile faded. "Or what?" Hollis did not answer. He just stood there, feet planted, shoulders square, every inch of him a wall. Nora moved to stand beside him. The foreman looked at her, then back at Hollis. "You are serious," the foreman said. "Dead serious," Hollis said. The foreman hesitated. Then he turned to his crew. "Pack it up. We will come back with the sheriff." The workers loaded their tools and climbed onto the wagon. The foreman gave Hollis one last look, then followed. The wagon rolled away, and the ranch fell silent. Hollis let out a breath. Nora touched his arm. "We did it," she said. "For now," Hollis said. They spent the night in the house, boarding up the broken windows and lighting a fire in the old stove. It was not much, but it was theirs. The next morning, the sheriff arrived. With him, Cutler, and a dozen armed men. Hollis stepped onto the porch. Nora stood beside him. Taggart dismounted. "Hollis Granger, I am here to serve an eviction notice. You have 1 hour to vacate this property." Hollis held up the deed. "This property is mine, legal and binding, filed with the Territorial Court in Denver." Cutler dismounted as well. He looked at the deed, then at Hollis. "That deed is under review. Until the court rules, the railroad has the right to occupy disputed land." "That is not how the law works," Hollis said. "It is how my law works," Cutler said. Taggart stepped forward. "I do not want trouble, Granger. But if you do not leave, I will remove you by force." Nora felt Hollis tense beside her. She knew what he was thinking. He could fight. He could make them drag him off. But they were outnumbered, and violence would only give Cutler an excuse to arrest them both. She stepped forward. "Sheriff," she said calmly, "I am a witness. If you remove Mr. Granger from his legal property, I will testify in court that you acted unlawfully. I will also send a full account to the territorial governor and every newspaper between here and Denver." Taggart frowned. "Miss Mercer, this does not concern you." "It concerns everyone," Nora said. "If the railroad can take one man's land with a forged deed, they can take anyone's. Yours included." Taggart hesitated. Behind him, Cutler's expression darkened. "She is bluffing," Cutler said. "Try me," Nora said. Taggart looked at Cutler, then at Hollis, then at Nora. Then he sighed. "1 week," he said. "I will give you 1 week to sort this out in court. If the judge rules against you, you leave. No arguments." "Fair enough," Hollis said. Taggart remounted. Cutler gave Hollis a cold look. "Enjoy your week." Cutler said. "It is all you have left." The men rode away, and the ranch fell silent again. Hollis turned to Nora. "You just threatened the sheriff." "I did," Nora said. "You are insane." "Probably," Nora said. Hollis laughed. It was a rough, surprised sound, and Nora realized it was the first time she had heard him laugh. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, lighter. "Come here," he said. Nora stepped closer. Hollis cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and deep, and Nora felt the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had risked, settle into something solid and real. When they finally broke apart, Hollis rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. Nora's heart stopped, then started again, faster. "I love you too," she said. The week passed in a blur. Brennan worked day and night, filing briefs and gathering evidence. Hollis repaired the barn. Nora returned to Eagle Gulch just long enough to resign from her teaching position, pack her belongings, and say goodbye to the few people who mattered. The school board tried to convince her to stay. The Reverend's wife told her she was making a mistake, but Nora just smiled and thanked them for their concern. She was done living a safe life. On the 7th day, they rode to the county courthouse. The judge, an old man named Halstead, reviewed the deed, the forged documents, and the testimonies. He listened to Brennan's arguments. He listened to Cutler's objections. Then, he made his ruling. "The original deed is valid," Halstead said. "The Union Pacific Railroad has no legal claim to the land or the water rights of Moonstone Ranch. All construction and occupation must cease immediately." Cutler stood. "Your Honor, we intend to appeal." "Appeal all you want," Halstead said. "But until a higher court overturns my ruling, Mr. Granger owns that ranch. And if I hear of any further harassment or intimidation, I will hold the railroad in contempt. Are we clear?" Cutler's jaw tightened. "Crystal." Hollis stood, and Nora saw the emotion flicker across his face. Relief. Vindication. And something deeper. Gratitude. They walked out of the courthouse together, hand in hand, and into the winter sunlight. "It is over," Nora said. "No," Hollis said. "It is just starting." They returned to Moonstone Ranch that afternoon. The barn was still half wrecked, the fences still down, but it was theirs. Hollis stood in the yard, looking at the land, and Nora saw the boy he must have been, running through these fields, learning to ride, helping his father mend fences. And she saw the man he was now, scarred, but standing, ready to rebuild. "Help me," he said, looking at her. "With what?" Nora asked. "Everything." So they did. They rebuilt the barn, board by board. They mended the fences. They cleared the fields. They hired a few hands from town, men who had been pushed around by the railroad and were more than happy to work for someone who had beaten them. Winter gave way to spring. The snow melted, and the grass came back green and thick. Hollis bought cattle. Nora planted a garden. They worked from dawn to dusk, side by side, building something that was theirs. And at night, they sat by the fire, Hollis's arm around Nora's shoulders, and talked about the future, about the children they might have, about the life they would build together. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Hollis pulled a small wooden box from his coat pocket and opened it. Inside, a simple silver ring. "I do not have much," he said. But I have this, and I have you, if you will have me. Nora looked at the ring, then at Hollis, and felt the tears prick her eyes. Yes, she said. Hollis slipped the ring onto her finger, and Nora kissed him, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, perfectly home. They were married in the spring, in a small ceremony at the ranch. Brennan came, and a few neighbors, and even Taggart, who admitted privately that he was glad the railroad had lost. Cutler did not come. But then, no one expected him to. Nora wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Hollis wore his best shirt and a borrowed tie. They stood under the oak tree near the house, and the minister, a traveling preacher passing through Eagle Gulch, spoke the words that made them husband and wife. Hollis kissed her, and the small crowd cheered, and Nora felt the weight of her past fall away. She was not the Reverend's rejected daughter anymore. She was not the solitary school teacher hiding in a rented room. She was Nora Granger, wife, partner, home. The ranch thrived. The cattle fattened. The crops came in strong. Hollis proved to be as good a rancher as his father had been, and Nora proved to be as good a partner as anyone could ask for. And when the railroad tried to appeal the court's decision, Brennan was ready. The appeal was denied. The railroad moved on to easier targets. Moonstone Ranch was safe. One evening, a year after the wedding, Nora stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and red. Hollis came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Nora smiled. "That I am glad I found you bleeding in my barn." Hollis laughed. "Best worst day of my life." "Mine too," Nora said. They stood there, wrapped in each other, as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of earth and horses and home. And for the first time in a long time, everything was exactly as it should be. The years that followed were not easy. Ranching never was. There were droughts and hard winters, cattle lost to disease, fences that needed constant mending. But Hollis and Nora faced it all together, and that made the difference. They had 3 children, a boy first, dark-haired and serious like his father. Then twin girls, auburn-haired and curious like their mother. The house filled with laughter and noise, with muddy boots by the door and drawings pinned to the walls. Nora taught the children to read by the fire at night. Hollis taught them to ride and rope and mend fences. They grew up knowing the value of hard work, the importance of standing your ground, and the power of choosing to trust someone, even when it was terrifying. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Hollis and Nora would sit on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, and watch the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Hollis asked once. "Leaving your old life behind?" Nora looked up at him. "Not for a second." Hollis smiled. "Good, because I do not know what I would have done without you." "You would have figured it out," Nora said. "Maybe," Hollis said. "But it would not have been nearly as good." Nora laughed and kissed him, and they stayed there until the fire burned low and the night grew cold. And then they went inside together, hand in hand, to the life they had built and the love that had saved them both.